What if nature had its own rights? What if nature could have representation in the courts, in society? What if nature was really a full part of our legal system in all sorts of creative ways that are starting to emerge worldwide? And this collective body of law that is starting to develop to really give nature a voice in the legal system we call Earth law. It also goes by names such as ecocentric law. In the Biodiversity Treaty, the overarching goal is living in harmony with nature by 2050. Full stop. It's not sustainable development. It's not maximum sustainable yield. It's not about humans. It's living in harmony with nature by 2050. And I think we need to understand nature has value apart from its monetary value to humans in order to achieve that goal.
Our existing laws, the Water Act, the Air Act, the Biodiversity Act, often treat nature as a collection of separate, isolated parts. They set limits on pollution, allowing us to contaminate air and water up to a certain point. They may step in to prevent a species from going extinct, but rarely do they actively restore thriving ecosystems. At best, these laws have acted as a temporary break, slowing but certainly not stopping the acceleration of climate change. But today, we are exploring a fundamentally different approach, an emerging body of law that recognizes the inherent interconnectedness of all living things. A legal framework that doesn't just aim for damage control, but envisions healthy, flourishing, and regenerating ecosystems. I'm talking about Earth Law. And it goes beyond simply acknowledging this interconnectedness, it seeks to build legal systems that actively support it. And to discuss this with us today, we are joined by Grant Wilson, a leading voice in the Earth Law movement and the executive director of Earth Law Center. With over a decade of experience, Grant has been at the forefront of advocating for the rights of nature, working with governments, communities, and businesses to create a future where humans and nature thrive together. Thank you so much, Grant, for joining us today. It's a pleasure to have you here.
Great to be here.
Grant, can we first begin this conversation by first understanding the core concepts of Earth Law with which you deal with and what are its principles? It would be great to contextualize the broad area in which you operate.
Yeah, sounds good. So, Earth law is the emerging body of law that aligns human legal systems with the laws of nature. And as we know, we have this whole set of laws worldwide that respects humans and our rights and our interests, but nature is really left out of the question. But what if nature had its own rights? What if nature could have representation in the courts, in society? What if nature was really a full part of our legal system in all sorts of creative ways that are starting to emerge worldwide? And this collective body of law that is starting to develop to really give nature a voice in the legal system we call Earth law. It also goes by names such as ecocentric law and wild law, but no matter what you call it, it's kind of the same thing. Legal systems that are aligned with the rhythms of the universe, that are aligned with the needs of nature. And rights of nature is probably the most prominent of those movements that a lot of people know about. There's also movements towards bioregional governance, criminalizing ecocide, the rights of future generations, and all these other efforts that are happening around the world right now.
Could you also briefly distinguish it from environmental laws? Because I think a lot of people could also be confused that how different are they from environmental laws?
Definitely. So environmental laws have been essential towards sort of reducing the worst damage we're causing to nature in a lot of cases. And environmental laws, as we know them today, a lot emerged in the late 1960s and early 1970s when rivers were burning with pollution and when there was so much smog in the air that you could hardly breathe in some places. And this reality still exists in a lot of the world, but these environmental laws were passed to kind of say, all right, there's a maximum level that we'll tolerate with pollution, and we've reached that. So let's take a few steps back. Let's do damage control. And I think of environmental laws as sort of emergency room laws. Let's take the pollution we have and reduce it a little bit, but they still operate within this larger framework of extractivism, of nature as being property, and really environmental laws, while they reduce some pollution, legalize a lot of pollution that is still allowed. So just to give a few examples, there's endangered species laws. These are great laws, very helpful to protect species from going extinct, but what they don't do is actually create thriving species populations that are healthy in relationship with other ecosystems. So again, the emergency room law, the Endangered Species Act, let's stop this species from going extinct, is sort of the framing of environmental laws. Now you can think of clean air laws and clean water laws, where the goal or the result is not always these perfectly healthy systems, but rather it's let's do damage control and reduce the level of pollution a little bit. Other things with environmental laws is they still treat nature as human property or a thing, and they're really based on a permitting system where if you have a permit to pollute, you can treat nature as you would any other piece of property. Earth law and ecocentric law is very different in that the goal is not to do damage control or to prevent the collapse of nature and kind of to live within this ambiguous area of near collapse, but rather the goal is healthy, interconnected, thriving ecosystems, and that is very, very different. Additionally, we know scientifically that humans are just one small part of this much larger interconnected web of life. We know this to be true, and Earth law applies this in practice. It's not just about human interests, human ownership over nature, but all life is represented with having rights or a voice or guardianship in the legal system. And there's some other differences to explore as well. There's also some similarities. For example, there's things in environmental laws you can still use in Earth law, environmental impact assessments, for example. But instead of in an environmental impact assessment just seeing are you doing the bare minimum, you should be looking at this bigger question of are you actually restoring nature to a state of health?
Grant, I think once you explain it, I think the kind of goal that you highlighted was achieving healthy, interconnected ecosystems. Would you want to take some time and delve a little bit deeper that what does a healthy, interconnected ecosystem looks like? Because as a body of law, I think it's also tough to emulate something or achieve something that's abstract. So where are we there when it comes to defining it or having a tangible goal there?
Definitely, and luckily there's a lot of science that helps define what makes an ecosystem healthy. I think one of the problems with traditional environmental laws is it treats different parts of ecosystems separately. So there's a law that protects the animals that's different than the law that protects an in-stream flow in a river, that's different than the law that protects forests. So just to give a couple examples, in the United States where I am, there's a Clean Water Act. And the way it's been applied is that it's only being used to protect these large navigable waterways, so big main stem rivers, but it's not used to protect seasonal or ephemeral springs or to streams rather. It's not used to protect wetlands of many wetlands across the United States. And so, if we think of a healthy, interconnected ecosystem, it's not just the main stem river. It's the entire watershed. We have to be protecting the forest in the watershed, the seasonal streams, the wetlands, whether they're connected to rivers or not. Think about the many species that exist within a watershed, and think about how do all of these separate parts collectively become healthy. Just to give another example of an Earth Law Center case working to protect the Elwha River in the Pacific Northwest, there was this huge effort by the federal government to remove a dam that was blocking this river. And we saw instantly salmon populations come back to life in this area. And it was amazing. But then at the same time, there's state efforts to clear cut around the river. So yeah, the dam was removed, the river's protected in that sense, but we're cutting down the forests that are along the stream banks, which causes erosion and pollution in the water, which there again devastates the salmon populations and other species in the water. So we have to think about not just these different parts of nature, but consider it collectively. And in fact, this is represented in a lot of rights of nature laws. You see in Bolivia in their rights of nature law, you see in Panama and their rights of sea turtles law that passed last year. And you see in the Universal Declaration of the Rights of Rivers this idea that nature has a right to health or to be healthy. And simply put, you can scientifically determine what that means and then put that into practice through many traditional mechanisms that we already know. And this is starting to happen in the courts as well. There was a huge case just a couple years ago in Ecuador on cloud forest. It's called the Los Cedros cloud forest case. And one of the big outcomes here was the court was determining whether to cancel a bunch of mining permits, which they ultimately did. And the defining factor was, we can't just look at the impact to this small localized area from mining. We have to look at the impact to these larger interconnected systems and really the bioregion. And this approach of thinking like nature, making rulings in accordance with nature's own rhythms is really starting to take hold, and figuring out what healthy ecosystems means is a big part of that.
But this also means that the people who are representing nature in whatever capacity they are need to be fully trained, need to have that education, or so to say that representative capacity. Because from your answer, I can gauge that. Not anyone can stand up and defend the rights of nature, because it would also be some sort of greenwashing, right? If the nature is not being represented in the correct capacity, considering that if nature is to be represented in full capacity.
Definitely, and this is the classic question: who speaks for nature? The Lorax, we all know, speaks for the trees, a classic Dr. Seuss book. But who speaks for nature, and how can they validly speak for ecosystems? And obviously, humans are interconnected with nature, but can we always represent the best interests of oceans and forests and rivers, and how? It's been seen that kind of traditional guardians of nature are great candidates to speak as nature in a legal sense. And just as an example, there was a recent case on rights of the Marañón River in Peru, where indigenous women river defenders went to court to protect this river, which is the major tributary to the Amazon River, to protect it from oil spills. And there was a rights of nature element to the case, which was successful. A lot of groups worked on this, including Earth Law Center. And the court said the river has a right to exist, to thrive, to be free from pollution, and so forth. And appointed amongst the guardians of the river these indigenous women river defenders who culturally have long spoken for the river, whose identity is deeply interconnected with the existence of this river, and who really are inseparable from the river itself. They are part of the river system. And so, this sort of person is a great guardian who naturally can speak on behalf of an ecosystem. Just like oftentimes there's family members who speak on behalf of other family members in legal proceedings. People are family with rivers, with salmon, with fish, with orcas, with oceans. And culturally, there's an understanding there that manifests often in indigenous communities, especially. Outside of that, however, we work to train people to speak as nature. We have a program called the Dandelion Fellowship, where we train people in what it means to serve as a voice for nature. How do you represent the diversity of life? And how do we remove human interests and mindsets from our representation of the natural world? And I see this as being a future career path for environmental defenders who want to speak for nature legally and can be trained to do so. But finally, if things go wrong, you have to think about, what if it goes wrong and someone's not actually representing nature? There's lots of precedent for removing a person from a role if they're not doing their job correctly. And there's people who speak as guardians ad litem for children. They represent them in the courts. And if they're not representing the best interest of the child, a judge will remove them and replace them with someone else. And so, as rights of nature becomes mainstreamed, there'll be checks and balances to ensure that we're actually representing its interests in practice.
And Grant, this makes me think that if someone has rights, there must be duties only from a legal perspective. So, for example, I'm also thinking in the situation if there's a guardian who's representing the voice of nature in the court of law, and if suppose there's someone who dies in the river who has some sort of a liability, so for example, there's a flood or something, and a calamity, where is the jurisprudence with respect to that when it comes to fixing the liability of an individual when something like this happens?
Yeah, this question has come up, and there's a number of legal questions that kind of fall in the camp of, we're taking this human created legal system made for humans and inserting nature into it. And there's always going to be some things to work out because, obviously if we had created the whole legal system from the beginning for nature, with nature in mind, there'd be a lot of differences in how we apply it now. But we're working with what we have and some legal fictions. And so, yeah, duties come up in the legal system all the time. I would say there's different camps of duties that nature would have. One is if nature has guardians and they enter into contracts to do things on behalf of nature, there's duties under contract law to fulfill your end of the contract. And that would be pretty straightforward. When it's things like flooding and someone drowns in nature, I think it is not applicable to apply duties in the traditional sense that you would for humans. Because when you think about the duty of a river, if it has one, it would be to, provide water that flows typically, downhill with gravity and collects into a water body and, nourishes the land where it goes. And, flooding is part of the natural processes of a river. So, if a river does have a duty, it's really to, fulfill its natural functions that it possesses in the universe and to serve its role in the larger community of life. And I think if that interferes with, human development or, people are harmed along the way, that's, there wasn't a duty in the first place for the river to, protect someone from drowning. So I don't think there'd be any liability of the guardian there. But, the point is, it is important to look at some of these, human inventions in the legal system, and you have to think about how nature fits in there. And sometimes there'll be some imperfect results, and we have to work those through as lawyers.
And I think when we were created enough to create an artificial legal person for a company or for a ship, or so to represent anyone, I mean, of course we can be creative when we are doing something with respect to rights of nature. So yeah, that answers that. But also, Grant, from your answer, I can see that there's a bigger problem with respect to when we talk about nature is how we always put a price on it. And that price is always put in a way which is sort of, as you said in the beginning, as a resource. But I think there's much more value to nature which is not captured traditionally. Are there movements, are there reports, is something happening on the international scene with which we are trying to really capture what is the value of nature,
Definitely. There's a huge movement to recognize that nature has intrinsic value apart from its utility to humans. And one place this was recently explored is the IPBES, which is an international science body, released a report exploring the diverse value systems of nature. And it pointed out, sort of as I just explored, that, yeah, one way to value nature is you put a price on it, but it identified over 50 other ways to value nature. And just to give a few examples, nature can be a family member. Many people in the Pacific Northwest, indigenous peoples, believe salmon to be their relatives. Some believe orcas to be their relatives. I've heard of people believing and understanding the ocean, rivers, certain water bodies to be family members or kin. This is another way to value nature. Nature's rights is another way to value nature as well. And then understanding that humans are part of nature, not separate from it. Many people have heard the Wanganui iwi who are a Maori tribe, say, "I am the river and the river is me," which means they are the river, in this case, the Wanganui River, whose personhood has been recognized, and they're inseparable from it. So there's this understanding there's many different ways to value nature, not just putting a price on it. And this conversation is playing out within international law bodies. So within the Convention on Biological Diversity, the global treaty that protects biodiversity worldwide, there's been an elevation of the idea that we have to start investing our finances and also creating new governance structures that understands nature has value apart from utility to humans. And some countries, such as Bolivia, are leading this conversation on the international stage, which I think will create just some really exciting possibilities. I did want to note, lastly, in the Biodiversity Treaty, the overarching goal is living in harmony with nature by 2050. Full stop. It's not sustainable development. It's not maximum sustainable yield. It's not about humans. It's living in harmony with nature by 2050. And I think we need to understand nature has value apart from its monetary value to humans in order to achieve that goal.
And Grant, has this movement also resulted into something tangible when it comes to changing the way, for example, the way people are reporting? Or for example, the companies have changed their approach, or for example, governments have tangibly started implementing how nature is much more valuable, like the 50 references that you've just told us. Has it also happened tangibly somewhere?
Yeah, I think there's examples of countries adopting new indicators of well-being that's not GDP. A lot of people have heard of gross national happiness in Bhutan. Like, why are we defining our well-being based on a monetary figure that's rooted in our exploitation of the natural world? Maybe we should gauge well-being based on our own happiness, and that's something really cool that Bhutan has done. I think there's a report that shows that banks invest $1.8 trillion in the destruction of nature every year. And, is that a good thing for society? People are starting to understand there's different ways to gauge what success means. If there's a country leading this, I would say it's really Bolivia. Bolivia has been pushing hard for Mother Earth-centric actions, for the rights of nature, the intrinsic value of nature, and this framework of buen vivir, or living well, as kind of the underlying metric of what well-being means in that country. So that's another place where people are starting to say, what's our goal here? Exploit nature, maximize our wealth, and which results in wealth inequalities as well? Or can we live in harmony with nature? Can we be happy? Can we live in relationship with each other and our communities, both human and non-human? And that's starting to emerge.
And Grant, in the beginning, you mentioned certain constituents of Earth Law movement, and of course, rights of nature is one of the biggest one. As being a professional who's been in this space for, I guess, close to 10 years now, you've seen this movement grow, evolve. Will shed some light with respect to how this movement has evolved and where do you see it going now? And maybe then, we can delve into few of the case laws with respect to how they were before and how they are now. And maybe so that we can put things in context that countries are increasingly adopting it and how they are making it really implement on the ground.
Definitely. The movement started in its current form, no more than about 20 years ago. The Navajo Nation passed a codification of its traditional laws recognizing the rights of Mother Earth and Father Sky in the early 2000s. Communities started passing local rights of nature ordinances in the United States. 2008, Ecuador puts rights of nature in its constitution. And so that was, about 15 years ago. Since then, there's been a rapid acceleration of the movement, hockey stick graph, just accelerating quickly. And now we see rights of nature emerging in, up to 5 national laws worldwide. We see in Ecuador constant cases in the Constitutional Court defending rights of nature in practice, with judges making rulings based on the rights of nature to protect cloud forests, rivers, marine ecosystems, and so forth. We see new countries passing national laws like Panama. We see court cases emerging in Peru and Colombia and Bangladesh and India. We see Spain in their constitutional court upholding a framework for rights of mar menor just recently. It's accelerating so quickly, and now it's reaching the international law level where within international law treaties, there's discussions of rights of nature as an emerging tool to safeguard the natural world. That being said, not all countries are going to be rights of nature countries in the future. I think we have to understand there's different cultures, and not everyone believes in rights-based systems to begin with, which really are a kind of Eurocentric legal framing. And so there's this biodiversity of legal approaches, including rights of nature, but also relationship-based frameworks, guardianship-based frameworks, and others that are part of this tree of life, of legal frameworks that's being put into place worldwide. The next evolution, I think, of this movement is one, treaties. I think we're going to see rights of nature treaties start to emerge beginning in Latin America. I think we're going to see more clear international law support, and we're already beginning to see it. I think economic frameworks are going to have to adapt to this, and we're going to see companies giving nature a voice, protecting nature, and restoring nature as part of their business because they understand the future is humans living in harmony with nature, and businesses that adapt to that are going to be successful, and we're going to see that happening more and more as well.
Grant, do you have a favorite case law?
I have a favorite case law. Well, I have many. I think cases that inspire people and tell a nice story are very, very important. I think of Panama as something really exciting, where a 20-something-year-old lawmaker, Juan Diego Vasquez Gutierrez, in Panama worked with a young scientist, Callie Wielenturf, as well as lawyers at Earth Law Center who were in their and legal advocates in their 20s and 30s. So this kind of youth-led movement to create a national rights of nature law in Panama that passed and has now been the basis of multiple court decisions defending the rights of nature, including pushing back against a wildly unpopular mine, and also extended to rights of sea turtle populations, which was the first national law to recognize the rights of a whole species. So I think that's a really exciting movement, and youth are so charged up to advance earth law and the rights of nature. Future leaders and judges and Supreme Court justices and presidents are growing up with this movement being normal to them, something they learn about in school. A lot of people have read our Earth Law course book or taken our summer course, which you can learn more about online, and now are becoming leaders of the future. So I think this Panama example with a lot of youth leadership is the tip of the iceberg for this new wave of ecocentric leaders who are going to put this work into practice.
And Grant, till now, our discussion has been mainly limited to courts, governments taking action. But does the Earth Law movement also somewhere cater to private businesses, people? What I'm also looking at, does the Earth Law movement also has ways in which the voice of the nature can be heard or included in their operations? Maybe on the private side, maybe on the individual side?
Definitely. We worked with a group called Lawyers for Nature, with support from a group called Voice for Nature and others, to create the first board seat for nature in a company called Faith in Nature in the United Kingdom. And basically we did this big analysis working with pro bono legal support to say, if a company has a duty to maximize its shareholder value as they do in the United States, or in the case of the United Kingdom, if board members have a duty to, quote, promote the success of the company, does giving nature a voice in the company actually allow for them to further that goal, or are those two things so in tension that it doesn't work? And our analysis kind of produced this finding that if you want to have a successful company in the long term, not just thinking quarterly, but many years or even multi-generationally, if you want to have a successful company, the voice of nature needs to be represented, and companies need to harmonize their practices with nature. They need to engage in a circular economy. They need to live within our planetary boundaries and so forth. And so we put nature on a board of directors. It's been very illuminating. And now all of these other companies are looking at this model and creating frameworks with nature as director, nature as a shareholder, as with Patagonia. nature as an advisor or inspiration. And companies are even looking to things like biomimicry, like how can companies operate like nature with this understanding that the future of our planet is a future in which humans and nature are thriving together. And companies that are doing this journey right now are going to be successful, and that's starting to proliferate worldwide.
Grant, would you want to give us a peep into how does it look like when nature is sitting on the board of directors? Like maybe if there's no conflict, maybe if you want to share that, how does nature intervene, where does nature intervene, and how does it basically set the discourse, if you're allowed to share.
Yeah, of course. You can read some reports online from this group, Faith in Nature, has been putting them out every year to say how's it going. They started off with two co-proxies for nature, Alexandra Peamore from Earth Law Center and Bronte Answell from Lawyers for Nature, who were co-proxies for nature. And I think it's always good if you can have multiple people represent nature collectively. It kind of brings in more diversity of opinions and background to do a better job of speaking for the natural world. And later on, Alexandra rotated off, and then Bronte was the voice, and now someone else is moving in. So it's kind of rotating. But what they discovered is, one, having just nature in the boardroom was extremely powerful, and its presence would kind of change the tone and the feel and the conversation of everything that happened in the board meeting. And two, nature would be consulted especially for issues on supply chains and product development and also sustainability and ESG internally in the company, and really bring a perspective of what does it actually take to uphold the health and voice of nature. And that would change decision making on where products come from, how they're shipped, how the company operates, where the company's supplies come from, and so forth. And so I encourage people to read the reports from Faith in Nature, and you can really see like decision by decision how it went.
I think just by knowing the fact that when you're saying something which might be ecologically harmful, and just looking at that someone sitting in the seat of nature, would make you feel like it's maybe it would have a psychological impact too, that fine, I mean, come on, I need to restrict at least some bit. So I think that's a big achievement in its own cause.
Definitely. And part of this movement towards earth law is, yeah, the legal side, but the legal side dramatically influences the cultural side as well. Like we saw with gay rights, when gay rights is legalized somewhere, public support for gay rights becomes dramatically stronger because there's a little interplay between the law and culture, and whether it's in a boardroom or a rights of nature law somewhere, these things influence public opinions and culture and our own personal accountability to nature as well. So it's a part of this larger ecosystem of systems change.
Grant, we're running out of time, but before we close this conversation, I am just curious if you have a call to action to different stakeholders who are in this movement, outside this movement, who may be listening to you, and yeah.
Right now in the earth law space, it's an era of innovation where there's so much happening in every sphere of law, in constitutional law, corporate law, family law, property law, and so forth. There's all this innovation happening that's really, really exciting. And so if you're in a space that has nothing to do with this, I would encourage you to learn about the movement and think about what creative innovations you can offer, which really could be put into place in practice, because governments are hungry for innovative, nature-centric solutions to the environmental crisis. So do some learning. You can take the Earth Law summer course. Information's online at earthlawcenter.org. We also have a law school course book. Check out the Global Alliance for the Rights of Nature and see if there's some activity in whatever region that you're in. And wherever you are, there's probably something happening. Just get involved and learn a little bit, and encourage anyone to contribute something to the movement.
Yeah. I mean, I have immensely benefited from your summer law course. So for sure, I'll share the links in the description and put also a link for the book, which I have read because of the summer law course as well, and which was very enlightening, so to say. It's a encyclopedia for everything one might want to know. So thank you so much, Grant, for doing this. I'm highly grateful for your time and for the work you are doing. I live in Chandigarh. It is an area where we had a judgment wherein a very sensitive judge passed rights passed on the rights to a lake, which is, of course, which has changed the way we also not only look at the lake, but also try and respect, as you said, there's some slippery slope between law and culture, and there's always exchange there. So good to see where the movement is going and for all the efforts that you put. And thank you so much.
Hey, thank you for having me.